Hi, everyone, and welcome to Real Life Talks. I'm your host, Yvonne Heath, author of the book, Love Your Life to Death, and founder of the I Just Showed Up movement. So I am so excited and happy and honored to have my guest today, Dr. Ganz Ferrance. Hello, Ganz. How are you doing?
Good. How you doing, Yvonne?
I am wonderful. And I have your bio here, and I can't read everything that you've accomplished and all that you are, because that would take our whole show. So I will just say, Ganz, with a Ph.D. in counseling psychology and an MA in developmental and educational psychology, you are offering practical, down-to-earth advice so we can do better. And your vision, a world where everyone experiences optimal health in mind, body, relationship, where they feel their best so they can do their best for themselves, their families, at work, and in the community. I love that so much. And doing the best for ourselves, our family, and our community means being aware of our community, being global citizens. And we've had some really good conversations in the past. We will continue to have them. And today, this conversation is in the aftermath, the months following that pivotal moment in our world, right? A pivotal moment when George Floyd, a Black man who was murdered by a police officer, May 25th, 2020 in Minnesota. And that forever changed. I was told by Anne-Marie Schroeder when we did a show that this is not new, which was also something that sort of shattered my world. But it was something that we could no longer ignore because it was caught on video and shared with the world. And so here we are months later. And first of all, I wanted to ask how you are doing in the months following this, and how are we doing with changing our conversations, having more conversations? Are we heading in a better direction? Are we taking action?
Yeah. Okay. So I think, I'm doing okay. It has been a crazy time, right? We're dealing with a lot of stuff right now. We're dealing with, 8 months or so of COVID and dealing with all that. We just, at this time that we're taping now, we've just gone through the US elections, and that whole run up to that, the uncertainty of what's going to happen, how long, whatever. And then, over the weekend, the huge relief for so many people in terms of the outcome of that.
Yes.
And I suppose also the disappointment for people on the other side as well, right?
Yep.
And so dealing with all those things, and then now we're, most of the world is also dealing with another significant uptick in COVID cases. And so, and the fatigue as winter is setting in the Northern Hemisphere for all of us, that, we're going to be inside a lot more. And we've already had to lock down for some stuff, and we may be heading for another one or some form of that. So we're heading into a very stressful time.
Yep.
Even though there are some things that we can be happy about, things that we can look forward to. I mean, some of the news on the COVID front is that they're really thinking they're getting closer to vaccines. And I know many governments are already setting up the infrastructure to be able to deliver vaccines once they have them, and different things like that. So there are some very positive signs for us moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think generally it is important for all of us to realize, as you said right at the top of the show, in order for us to do better, in order for us to do well, we have to be better. We have to be well.
Mm-hmm.
It's important for us to make sure that we're doing things to look after ourselves, to manage the stress, to, I guess, take account of it and factor it into our lives. The fact that it's normal for us to feel a little off. It's normal for us to maybe be a little more emotional or emotionally volatile or exhausted, or maybe even a little irritable sometimes, right? And recognize that that's okay, so we don't beat ourselves up, but then also to make space for that, so we give ourselves a little extra grace. so we can look after ourselves more. We add more of the positive things we usually do to look after ourselves, and then also recognize if we're off, it's likely that everybody around us is probably off too. So give them some extra grace and some extra patience as well.
Absolutely. We are just so on the same page. And one of the things I think that we really have to, first of all, we have to understand grief, right? We are experiencing global grief. We are experiencing when this, in the aftermath of George Floyd and no longer being able to, think that this racism is a thing of the past.
Right.
It's unraveled a lot. And so there's tremendous grief in that. Pandemic, systemic racism, and then just regular grief, divorce, diagnosis, job loss. There's grief in all of that. And as you said, we need to be so intentional about checking in mentally, physically, and emotionally, and understanding that grief and joy can and do coexist. So in the midst of all this grief and stress, we need to be very intentional about creating. Absolutely. Right? About creating. So even as I was thinking, we're going to be talking about racism. This is challenging. It's emotional. And I look at my background and I think, is this appropriate? And I think, yes, actually, because we have to give ourselves grief breaks and, wherever we can bring in a little joy.
Absolutely.
Right. So yes, because I need it.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Listen, we cannot, well, there's talking about, this is coming from the financial, enlightenment world, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. There's a saying says, you can't help the poor by becoming one of them. Right. It's like, so it makes sense. You can't help somebody who's grieving if you're in the middle of grief and you're stricken with grief and you're wiped out as well. And look at, just to sort of put this in some context. Okay. And this is not, I hope this doesn't come across harsh. Okay. But the fact that this is your background and you're, you're positive, you're happy, you're doing this, it's good, because having a conversation about difficult things is a part of life. This is not something separate from life. This is not a special event. This is life. We have grief. We have issues we need to deal with. And for everybody of color, the George Floyd thing, it was horrible, but the turning point, the watershed moment, was that everybody else woke up, because we've been dealing with this every day from the time that we're born. Do you know what I mean? And so it's grief, I think, for non-people of color, because the innocence is lost for many in many ways, right? But for people of color, it's like, okay, thank God they see it now. Do you know what I mean? It's like, okay, so it's really hard to deny that what we've been saying forever, and no one was taking us seriously. Or if there was a little uptick, and then it would go away because something else big came in the news. And so now it's like, oh, everybody sees us. And again, just like I was saying at the beginning, it's encouraging to see that there are these positive things. People of all walks of life are involved in this struggle. And that's a beautiful thing to see. It's a beautiful thing to see when people are asking questions, when we're having these kinds of conversations, Yvonne, about real stuff, because these, weren't really happening before, not in a big way. And now people are actually we're having these conversations. And so it's absolutely appropriate that your background is positive, and we may have some humor as we talk about some of this stuff. And because, we need breaks. It can't just be heaviness and drudgery and the world is terrible and all this stuff the whole time. Because again, as a Black man, as Black people living in the States or anywhere else in the world, every day you got to get up, you got to feed your kids, you got to have some joy, you got to have birthday parties, you got to do all this other stuff in the midst of this, really what everybody's realizing is a horrible context right now.
Absolutely. And there's just so much to talk about. And we can't unsee it, right? And that's the thing, like it's like that before and after that moment, we can no longer just pretend, live in our bubble. As I've shared with you before, my bubble was burst. And here's the elephant in the room, even when it's disguised. I'm sorry, Canadians. Yes, we are polite. Yes, we are, we have that reputation. We say sorry for everything. racism exists and is alive and well in Canada too.
Absolutely.
It's a global issue.
Mhm.
And when should we stop having these conversations? When all Black Lives Matter everywhere by everyone. And for me, there's an acceptance that this is an ongoing conversation for the rest of my life, and helping people to understand. And I'm the first to say, I didn't know, I didn't understand. And so I'm okay with making mistakes.
Mhm.
I'm okay with saying, sorry, I didn't really understand, the implicit bias. I mean, I didn't even know that systemic racism. I didn't know. And one of the things that, and we talked about before, that I think is so important, we didn't know, where's my notes? We didn't know because history has been suppressed.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? It's been suppressed.
Well,
That's why we don't know.
there's two reasons. That's one of them. The big thing is history has been like systematically, and this is one of the things that people typically don't talk about when it comes to systematic racism, is the systematic suppression of history and the rewriting of it to favor the people on top. And this is not new, like it happens everywhere, right? But this is a big chunk of it. The historically, the powers that be, and we'll talk about the term white supremacy as a concept, not as an action, right? As a philosophy, right? And really, and I'll say it, but I'll want to qualify it. It's really white, straight, middle-aged, male, cisgendered supremacy. Okay. So, so like, and that does not mean, that term does not mean that every middle-aged straight white man is the enemy. This is not what this means. It means that the system is built to support that concept. And so people have been born into it. All of us have been born into it. No one alive today, nobody created the system. Nobody. Okay. So it's important for everybody to understand that nobody created this system, but we're all born into it, and there are consequences for all of us that were in the system. So it doesn't mean that every white man or every white person or whatever is whatever, because if we think that way, that's just perpetuating the same problem in a different direction. Okay. The idea is that the system is biased, and this is why we have a lot of the problems we have now, because for most of it, everybody just accepted the system, right? Because it was, for many people, it's invisible. It's just, it doesn't, you don't see it. And particularly for white people, it's shocking when you come across acts of racism or the system sort of showing itself, right? It's shocking, and it's appalling. But that happens very rarely in a white person's daily life, right? Sometimes even in a lifetime. So in some ways, it makes sense that you wouldn't really see it or wouldn't really believe it, because you'd only see it when something like the murder of George Floyd shows up, and it's like the whole thing is played out, and there's no way for people to be able to make excuses or talk about what happened before, or, well, we didn't see that this had happened or whatever, and you just saw it. And so all of a sudden, this is one of those watershed moments in our culture as humans.
Absolutely. And for us to understand, and that's what, for me, understanding systemic racism, okay, it's been in place for many years. And when you're talking about the color ladder, I'm okay, so in this system, the white straight male is at the top in the color ladder, and at the lowest is the Black female, and
dark skinned Black female. The darker you are, the worse.
Dark skinned Black female. And it's interesting because I'm so emotional because this election made me a mess, and also because it's interesting, before this conversation, I had the opportunity to speak with you and Valerie Shepard, who is a dark-skinned Black woman living in the United States. And I had you both all to myself, two of the smartest people I know. It was an honor and a privilege. And we were having this conversation. And when you talked about that, the color ladder and, white being at the top and the dark-skinned Black woman at the bottom. And I'm looking at Valerie, and it was just like, it was like a moral injury. I felt this, like it's a moral injury. Like I just felt that wave of shame, you know, and you and everyone, and Valerie, Anne-Marie Schroeder, all of you who are just so gracious in helping us to work together, saying like, don't feel bad for not being marginalized, but you know, maybe help the other guy who is,
Right.
the other person who
Yeah.
is. And I have to just get myself back to that, because I find that so painful, you know, to think
Yeah.
that I'm going to do well at the cost of someone else suffering more. That is not the world I want to live in.
Right. Right. And you know, I think well, let's just talk about those kinds of emotions like shame and guilt and those sorts of things, right? So these are healthy emotions, right? These are, you know, all emotions are healthy. They're part of our makeup and we need to have them. The those types of emotions really are to help wake us up and to motivate us,
Mhm.
to help us realize that things are not the way either we think they should be, or correct or fair or whatever it is. After that, though, they don't really serve much of a purpose, right? And so once you have the message, once you get the lesson, then it's like, okay, all right, now I know. Now I can, what can I do on a daily, regular basis to use this position that I'm in for good, as opposed to just sort of like, hey, this is wonderful, this is the way the world is, and sort of go through life unconsciously,
Right.
or even consciously exploiting it, right? So again, people of color have had to carry around shame and the feeling of being less than for a long time, generations, right?
Mhm.
But that's not useful, that's not helpful, it's not good. So so if we're carrying this around, and then all these white folks that have been made aware are now carrying around a lot of stuff too.
Right.
It's like we said, so we're all carrying about around this all this
Right.
guilt, and nothing changes, right? So
Sure.
you know, it's one of the things that some of the work in communities of color, the indigenous communities, the Asian communities, the Hispanic, you know what I mean, all of our communities, is to help to feel proud of who we are and proud of where we're going in our contributions.
Mhm.
But the same thing, I think, needs to happen with the white community now, is to recognize that, you know what, yeah, you were born into a system you didn't create. And yes, you have some privilege, but you didn't do it. Like I get that there's awareness of, oh my goodness, I didn't realize it was so different for other people.
Mhm.
Yeah, it is.
Mhm. Mhm.
So continue the conversation, continue the learning, and look for ways to be inclusive. Look for ways to help educate other folks.
Mhm.
Look for ways to ask questions so that you understand. And then, you know, it's like one of the most healing things, honestly, Yvonne, is conversations like this,
Mhm.
right? It's when people who have been in the privileged position see it for what it is and actually ask about it and talk about it and say, okay, well, how can how can I help? How can I do differently? Do you know what I mean? Because there's a validation of what we've been through. There was this idea before of, I don't see color, everybody's the same to me, right? Like the color blindness, right? And
Yeah.
I understand where, like, the motivation for some of that stuff was, we're all the same, we're all equal, and we want to
Right.
make an equal world. So I understand it's coming from a good place,
Right.
but what it does, though, is it denies the actual experience of people who have not had it. It's not been like that.
Mhm.
Do you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
so being able to have these conversations and just say, yeah, no, I recognize that. I see you. It's like, okay, so this is, you've probably had it harder than everybody else, you know, Black woman. I'm really sorry. I never realized. What can we do? Let's talk. How can we help? Right. And like you and I have talked about in the past before this interview, also giving the people who have been marginalized a little bit of space,
Mhm.
because they may not always be open to that conversation when you are. Do
Right.
you know what I mean? Like that, even the conversation, bringing it up, sometimes you got to be delicate, just like anything else.
Mhm.
You know, sometimes that can be a little heavy, just to be able
Mhm.
to talk about that in that moment.
Absolutely. And being respectful of that and being okay with asking the questions. And if someone says, I am done talking about this
Mhm.
with you, white people, go educate yourselves, and educating yourself. And truthfully, I mean, it's never been easier to educate yourself. I have been watching Emmanuel Acho
Mhm.
conversation, hard conversations or with a
Yeah, with a
black
black man.
man.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yes, amazing. And there's been some incredible YouTube and books, and I'm educating myself. And I think, again, back to that grief and joy, when there's so much grief in the world, we just feel like, oh my gosh, I can't think of one more thing. Yes, you can take breaks and continue to bring the joy in along the way, and just accept that this is a conversation that needs to be had for life. And another aha moment is Black people didn't create this problem,
Mhm.
white people did.
Mhm.
So it is our, I mean, I believe it's every human being's obligation to care enough about their society, because another quote from Gandhi: the true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members.
Absolutely.
Right, it just jumped out. All these things are jumping out on pages I've got quotes everywhere, because again, it is our responsibility
Mhm.
to open our eyes to every person. And when you feel exhausted by having the conversation, imagine being that person, and living it all day every day. So
Yeah. Well,
yes, take breaks and get back to it.
yeah, yeah. Well, I was listening to some of the actors that it's in the movie Harriet. I don't know if you've seen it, right?
No.
Okay, very good source of information for folks. If
Okay,
you,
good to know.
it's
Harriet.
Harriet, yeah, about Harriet Tubman. And so it was listening to some of the actors. He said, it's tough. It was a tough shoot, right? Tough material, tough shoot, tough weather. And they said, yeah, they kept reminding themselves, yes, nothing like what Harriet Tubman actually had to go through herself, right? And so
Yes.
that helped them to put it into perspective and then motivated them to keep going. Okay. So, I will say this. So for the white folks, yeah, white people created the system, but no white people today created the system. The white people today and the black people and everybody else kind of perpetuate the system because it's been running for generations.
Mhm.
So the responsibility, I would just want to characterize it this way. It's not the responsibility of creating the system why it's incumbent on you to start to break it down and change it, right?
Okay.
It's more the responsibility of position, I think. So you didn't make it, so you don't have to have sort of guilt around creation of a bad thing,
Right.
but the position you're in, given that given the color ladder, you're the ones with the most power, right? You're the ones with the biggest tools to be able to make change, because that's the way the system is run for several hundred years. And so from that position,
Mhm.
you've got positional power that then, if you choose to, if you want to be balanced and fair and reasonable, then yeah, from the position, if the position requires that you step in and do stuff to make it different, right? So it's a little nuance, but I just
No,
want to
it's
make that
important
clear,
though.
because a lot of some of the pushback we hear, quite frankly, is
Mhm. I didn't
I
do
didn't
it.
I didn't do it. You know what I mean? And it's why should I feel shame? I shouldn't have to hang my head as a white man walking in the world today. I agree. You
Yeah,
shouldn't. No one should have to hang their head and feel shame. You didn't create it, but if you want to make a change, you have the power to make the change.
absolutely. There was in the last few minutes, and I'm going to ask you something positive, but I saw on Facebook this morning, ironically, again, Adrian Starks was writing that he says he finds it interesting and disturbing that we focus so much on the color of one's skin that we forget the light of the soul.
Mhm.
We're on this planet for the human experience. We are not here to judge or harm because of the mere biology of one skin color in relation to its exposure protection from the sun, because that's why people have darker skin. We're all the same, pretty darn close. We can change the world by changing how we relate to the people in our own world, in our day-to-day living. This is called courtesy and human dignity.
I love that.
Right?
Courtesy
It's
and human dignity. Yeah.
courtesy
Yeah.
and human, and that's all we're talking about
Yes.
here.
Yes. That's it.
That everyone has value and everyone matters.
Yeah.
People of all colors. And so I knew this would fly by. Are we moving in the right direction? Is there a feeling of positivity moving in the right direction, Ganz?
So I would say overall, yes, right? Quotes like that, conversations like this, the awareness that everybody has, you really see governments, large corporations, people really taking up the fight. We're hoping it's not just like, lip service. It's actually going to be some substantial change, but this is what it is, right? So understanding that we all taking that quote and really looking at how do we see that humanity in the other individual without denying the experience that they may have gone through, right? Their experience, what they've had to live with, helps to make them who they are. So we need to see that, but that's part of their humanity. But the value is equal, right? So the experience may not be the same, but the value has to be equal. And so this is what we have to really, really be aware of and look at and be mindful of. And then all of us need to really understand and look for people's hearts and be a lot tougher to be able to stay in the tough conversations. And
let's keep having these conversations ongoing. Let's keep having them. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart it is for me an honor and a privilege to know you, to call you my friend, to learn from you, to learn with you. Thank you for everything that you do. People can reach out to you for more information. Absolutely. AskDrGanz.com, ask DRGANZ or Z.com. Reach out and let's keep learning together. And I will tell you that I am celebrating this beautiful Black woman VP in the United States of America. This is a wonderful moment in our history. Thank you, Ganz. Thank you, Yvonne. Oh, thank you so much for joining us. Real Life Talks is about learning how to just show up for ourselves and learning how to just show up for each other, and sometimes have hard conversations, which are good conversations, and let's keep having them. So if you want to be empowered and resilient, my call to action, as always, plan your life, plan your death, and then just love your life to death. And always bring your own tambourine to the party. Bye for now.